been, and how excited the crowds must have been. Amen? I would have been, wouldn't you? And do you think people were excited over what Jesus was teaching, or do you think they were mostly excited about a free lunch miracle? Honestly, if I were there for the free lunch miracle, I would have wanted to hear what the man said, but the free lunch miracle was pretty impressive, don't you think? And so those crowds were just swarming around Jesus. And so what follows is that after that teaching and that tremendous miracle, Jesus pulled away. And I always want to make note of the fact that throughout Scriptures we're told that Jesus pulled away. In fact, this day he just really needed to be by himself. He didn't need the disciples watching and praying this time. He just needed to pull away. So he sent the disciples ahead out on the boat, out on the lake. And Jesus pulled aside to pray. And we can only imagine that the crowds dispersed then. Can you imagine what the talk was about? All those leftovers, where in the world did they come from? How could there have been so much? I ate it until I'm full. I'm not even going to need supper. I'm not even maybe going to need breakfast tomorrow. I am so full by what Jesus has fed me. What an amazing thing. I think I would follow him anywhere at that point, wouldn't you? Don't we want to see miracles? Yeah, and so Jesus dispersed the crowds. He pulled away to spend quiet time with God, sent the disciples ahead. And then, can you imagine being the disciples going, how am I going to connect with Jesus again? And that's when Jesus comes walking across the water, and Peter says, let me walk out if that's really you. And then there's that other miracle. Jesus was like that, one miracle after another. By the time the disciples reached the other side of the lake with Jesus in tow at that point, the crowds had said, you can imagine that wildfire must have just spread the word because, wow, what happened? And if that happened, we want to see more miracles and we want to hear some more of what he's got to say. And so we pick up the story as Jesus has met the crowds, and he knows. He says, did you follow me because of what I said, or did you follow me because you want to see a miracle and have a free lunch miracle again? And then Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And so we pick up with verse 35, chapter 6 of John, if you're following along. John chapter 6, beginning with verse 35, and then we're going to jump to verse 41 after 35. Listen now for the gospel of Jesus. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Those who come to me will never go hungry. Those who believe in me will never be thirsty. Verse 41. At this, the Jews began to grumble about him because he said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. They says, isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, I came down from heaven? Jesus knew what they were saying, and he said, stop grumbling among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. It is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. Everyone who listens to the Father and learns from him comes to me. No one has seen the Father except the one who is from God. Only he has seen the Father. I tell you the truth. He who believes has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your forefathers ate manna in the desert, and yet they died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which man may eat and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, they will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I give for the life of the world. Brothers and sisters, this is the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. Holy and awesome are you, Almighty God, and blessed are we to have received this miraculous Jesus Christ. One who can feed multitudes, one who can walk on water, and one who can humbly come before you and advocate on behalf of us sinners. Thank you, God, for loving us so much that in the fullness of time, you sent your Son, Jesus Christ, born of a woman, to redeem us from ourselves, from our sin, from the lives that were bound to hell. And now, God, you have given us life in the bread of life, Jesus himself. So bless us as we meditate upon your word and as we feast upon Jesus, the bread of life. Thank you, God. Amen. It must be one of the most amazing things that one has ever smelled, the smell of fresh bread baking. Oh my goodness, we could probably spend hours telling stories about fresh bread. Some of the memories I have, by the way, this is my great-grandmother's breadboard. And my great-grandmother died before I was born, but my great-grandfather was still living. Papa, we called him. He lived out in the country, and when we would go to Papa's house, I'm not sure if they were homemade biscuits or if they were canned biscuits. I really don't care. I care about the fact that they were always there at Papa's house. In a little basket wrapped in a gingham red and white checked napkin, there were always biscuits on Papa's table. He'd make them early in the morning, and I don't know if when he knew we were coming he made extra or if he always had that many. I would bet he knew we were coming and made extras because we loved. I don't remember eating anything else at Papa's house, but I remember there were always biscuits on the kitchen table. I remember Miss Dawson. Miss Dawson was old when I was little. She was almost as small as I was. She was this little teeny old lady who was a member of my daddy's first church. She was the typical church lady. You know who those people are? You know the church ladies, the ones who can do everything. And my daddy always says there's a Miss Lily in every church. Miss Lily was large and in charge, and you knew it if she didn't like the way you did something. She knew everything, and she really was smart. And boy, as a kid, she taught Sunday school, she played the piano, she did just about everything at the church. She would save everything, and I do mean everything. And we would make the coolest crafts in Sunday school out of the everything that she saved. Things that we would make out of egg cartons, or she always used that squeezed lemon in her iced tea. And so things we would make out of those squeezed lemon containers, or straws. She never threw away a straw. If she was out at a place, she always saved straws. And somehow she always had extra paper plates or straws or yarn or stuff that you can make things with. But I remember those things about her, but I also remember her in her apron back in the pantry. She had the old big flour barrel, wooden flour barrel, and she had an old breadboard, and I don't remember what it looked like. I remember hers being more like a board than a bowl. But I remember her scooping out that flour and adding just the right amounts and just the right things together to make some of the most delicious biscuits that ever touched my lips. I remember the love and the effort of making homemade fresh bread every time I was ever at her house. We've kind of lost that art, haven't we? The art of making fresh bread is just too easy to buy it at the store nowadays. So for those of you who are fresh bread bakers, pass down the recipes, because we don't know how to make biscuits in my generation, unless they come out of the freezer or a can, or maybe the Bisquick box. But what a great art, fresh bread. Bread is a universal language. Every country, every culture has some form of bread, whether it's rice or something made from cornmeal or something made from flour, whether it's flat bread, yeast puffy bread, crusty bread, tortillas. Everybody knows some form of bread, and there are many places where all that people can afford to eat is bread. And all that they can afford to eat or to drink is water. Bread and water can sustain a body for life. Jesus knew that. And in another text, he called himself living water. We talked about that just a few weeks ago when he met the woman at the well. He said, I could give you water that would fill you in such a way that you would never need to drink again. And she said, give me this water. Where do you get that? Give me this water. And we remember that she was such a great evangelist. She went and told her whole village. We just talked about that like 3 weeks ago. The living water. In today's text, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Well, for people in the culture that Jesus talked to, bread was life. If you didn't have bread, you didn't have anything, because that was poor man's food. If you didn't have bread, you didn't have life. And Jesus says, I can fill you in such a way that you will never, ever be hungry again. This I am the bread of life is the first in John's Gospel of seven I am statements. Do you remember some of them? I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget them. Anybody remember any? I am the potter, you are the clay. Yes, that's an Old Testament text though. What does Jesus say? I am the light of the world. Yep, that's definitely one of them. I am the, what about, Oh, the way, the truth, and the life, yes. I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for my lambs. I am the door. That's one we don't talk about that often. We need to talk about that one some more. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the true vine. Those are the 7 that Jesus talks about. But he begins with, I am the bread of life. And when Jesus says, I am, there's something that's a little bit of a play on words. It's not just Jesus saying, I am bread, that I will fill you. It's not just that use of something common that people would understand that he could fill them. But I am is his way of identifying with God. Remember way back in the Old Testament scriptures when Moses was standing in front of the burning bush and he says to God, as God has called him, and Moses is trying to think up all the reasons he cannot go to set his people free, and he says, who shall I say is sending me? And God simply says, I am. In fact, in the Old Testament language, you will see the word Yahweh used for the name of God, because people wouldn't even speak the name of God because they felt like the name was so powerful. They wouldn't even write all the vowels in. It would be YHWH, Yahweh, written down because the name of God was so powerful. And when God says to Moses, I am sending you, to me, God is saying, you cannot even imagine who I am and who I will be and how I will provide for you. When God says, I am, God says, I am everything you will ever need and everything you can ever imagine. So when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, he says to us, not only I have what will nurture you, but I am from God. I am one with God, and I am all you will ever need. How hungry are you today? I'm a little bit physically hungry. We left our bread in North Carolina, so all we had was 2 pieces of flat tortilla this morning. Peanut butter and jelly on tortilla is messy, I gotta tell you. But it works. But it wasn't quite as filling as the bread that we usually have, so I'm starting to feel a little bit hungry. So I'm looking forward to communion, but I'm also looking forward to snack time. Jesus knew that we would always be hungry, right? Physically, aren't we? You cannot store up, I have tried it, you cannot store up enough fat just to live off of. You still get hungry even if you're fat. I have tried it. It doesn't work that way. When we eat, we're going to be hungry again. People in the grocery business got it down. They're never going to really run out of people who are hungry because we're going to be hungry again right after we eat in a few hours, or at least the next day. We're going to always be hungry. Jesus speaks to our hunger today. And it's not just to the hunger that is in our belly, it is the hunger that is in our hearts. We are looking for things. We are looking for answers. We are looking for things that will sustain us. And I don't know about you, but I often get it wrong. I often look in the wrong places. Jesus wants us to know today, I am the bread of life. I am necessary for your life. I am the one who feeds you in a way that you will never, ever be sustained again. Jesus also says, the bread that I give is not just for today, but it's eternal. Wow, what a gift. You mean I don't have to go to the grocery store anymore? Wouldn't that be great? The bread that I give, Jesus says, is eternal. It will last forever. Stay close to him. Draw near to him. Come to this table, those who are hungry. Come to this table, those who have gotten it wrong so many times. Come to this table, sinners in need of repentance. Because here you will meet again the living bread, the one whose food will sustain you forever. Let us pray. Gracious and almighty God, you who are the bread of life for us, thank you. Thank you for the ways that you sustain us. Thank you for the ways that you move in us. Thank you that even though we get hungry again and again, and not just physically, spiritually, emotionally, we're still hungry. Help us to know, to have enough faith to seek you in our hunger, and to know that you are the only